Hello, and thank you for watching Accelerate with Nerdio. In this video, I'm going to walk you through an Fslogix overview. Fslogix is the software used to manage user profiles to allow for a dynamic host environment where WVD personal desktops and host pools can be reimaged or scaled in and out without impacting user profiles and their data. Additionally, be sure to check out the video description and helpful links and updates from this video. Let's review our agenda. First, we'll be discussing the prerequisites to follow along with the content provided by this video. Second, we will provide an overview of Fslogix with content taken from the September webinar where we covered high-level aspects of Fslogix application, its orchestration in a Nerdio environment, and some troubleshooting considerations. Let's discuss the needed prerequisites. First, you'll need at least one WVD personal desktop and/or pool, an account with domain admin privileges, and access to FS01. We will now turn to the following content from our September 2020 webinar presented by Christopher Jones.
And like you mentioned, everybody, my name is Christopher and I'm one of the partner experience engineers here at Nerdio. So today I plan to hopefully demystify a topic that most of our partners seem to be a little bit confused about. And that topic is Fslogix and the way user orchestration is handled in the WVD environment. So what I'll do is I'll start out by giving us just kind of a brief reminder of RDS and some of the pain with UPDs and roaming profiles. Then we'll walk through the Fslogix orchestration in the Nerdio environment and how we have architected the user management piece to work. And I'll conclude by providing just a few tips for troubleshooting Fslogix and profile mount errors. All right, so let's start out by talking about RDS and UPDs for a second. And well, UPDs provided great utility for roaming profile management. They definitely had their quirks. And as I'm sure you guys all know and remember, these included things like long login times for large profiles, and then the reason that it took so long is because these profiles actually had to be downloaded, and this would obviously place a pretty significant strain on the network. And then the opposite side of this is, when the users go to log out, they actually have to upload all the changes and everything that was done on their profiles, right? And if for whatever reason there was a disruption in the network during the upload process, it would result in a corrupt profile, and now you'd need a technician to physically intervene to actually bring the profile back in order. So, obviously there's more issues that could come into play with UPDs. I think these are some of the primary pain points that we commonly see. So with that in mind, Microsoft knew that they needed to upgrade the way they handled the user management piece, the user profiles and multi-session environments, if they were going to stay competitive in the cloud space. So as a result, in late 2018, Microsoft acquired a company called Fslogix, and they added it to their virtualization stack. And Fslogix kind of veers away from the traditional UPD configuration and instead utilizes virtual hard drives to manage the user orchestration piece in the virtual environment. So now what we'll do is let's jump over to the next slide and we'll see kind of what this looks like in a practical application on the Nerdio backend. So what you're looking at here now is kind of an overview of what you would see on the Nerdio backend. So what we've got on the starting from the left side is the file server, and this is where all the user data resides. So each user gets their own virtual hard drive, and then a few user-specific folders are split out from there. So this includes things like the desktop, my documents, and the favorites folders. And this is done for a few reasons, primarily to prevent bloat and then also to simplify the remediation process if there are issues with the virtual hard drive, but I'll cover that in a little bit. So then continuing on to the right side, Fslogix is installed on the pool template and is then also on the session hosts in that pool by default. So once Fslogix is installed, it is configured to point back to the source of the user's virtual hard drives, which in this case is FS01, so that when users go to log in, they are assigned to the correct resource. And there are two important takeaways from this. The first is that FS01 is the source of authority for the user information. So nothing is stored locally on the session hosts, and this makes the environment very dynamic from a resource allocation perspective. Second, since the critical user folders, such as the desktop, the documents, and the favorites folders, are separated from the virtual hard drives, those VHDs can be deleted if there's a corrupt profile, and there really aren't any significant negative effects other than the user spending, 2 minutes reorienting their profile. So this would be things like resetting their desktop background and getting their taskbar back to normal, things like that. So, again, from an overview perspective, you've got the file server on the left side here. It's the source of the user information. The user sessions are there in the middle. The users are connecting to the different pools, and Fslogix is running on the pools to make sure that everything is oriented correctly. Now, I know this looks pretty simple, and that's because it really is, but to break things down even further, let's dig into what this actually looks like in a live environment. All right, so following the outline of the previous slide, let's look at the file server first, and then we'll take a look in the next slide at the session host, and we'll kind of dig into the Fslogix configuration there. So as you can see here, starting from the left side, we are on the root of E, and this is on the file server, and there are two primary folders that we will focus on. The first one is the profiles folder, which hosts the user's virtual hard drive, and you can see that expanded out to the top right, and we've got Sally Sales virtual hard drive there. The second folder is the users folder, and you can see that expanded out to the bottom right, and this hosts the user's desktop, documents, and favorites folders. And these folders are just being redirected to the session host with a standard group policy, so I'm not going to get into that there, but that's how it's being orchestrated. So there are several benefits to having them split out like this, but the primary reasons are as follows. First of all, when a user's virtual hard drive becomes corrupt in a configuration like this, getting them back into order is a simple matter of deleting it and allowing a new one to get created upon the user's next login. This is similar to what we just mentioned in the previous slide. Second primary reason is splitting them helps to prevent the virtual hard drive from getting bloated past the 30 gigabyte default limit placed on it by Microsoft. So Microsoft allows these virtual hard drives to expand in a flexible rate. It does it by default up to 30 gigabytes. So if users are saving stuff on their desktop, their documents, and they got a bunch of different favorites and things like that, it's going to fatigue the virtual hard drive much quicker than if you just separate out those primary three folders there. And the last reason, the third there, is if a user were to get a temporary profile when logging into the session host, so let's say there's an issue, their virtual hard drive, the real one we're seeing here, didn't actually get mounted correctly, so they get a temporary profile. In that case, their desktop background might be blank, or they might not see, some of their taskbar customizations, but they'll keep working, they'll go throughout their day, and they might complain at the end of the day and let you know. Because the desktop documents and favorites folders are redirected, that's primarily where they're going to save most of their information anyway. So when we get their virtual hard drive, their correct one, mounted to the session host the following day and they log in, they didn't really lose any critical data, right? Whereas if we had this, if they were actually working out of a true temporary profile with all of their folders and everything native in there, when they got their primary profile connected again to the session host, all of the work they would have done would have been totally lost. So this is kind of what it looks like on the file server side. So now let's jump over to the session host side. All right, so what you're seeing here is directly on the session host in a given WVD pool. So as I'm sure you guys know, technically Fslogix is installed on the template and configured on the template, and then those changes are pushed out to the session hosts. But because the session hosts are a mirror image of the template, you can log into the session host, kind of see the way it's configured. So if you broke down Fslogix to kind of its base, it's just some simple software that's installed on the template and the session hosts. And, it's not even sophisticated enough to like have its own configuration wizard or anything like that. You basically set it up here through the registry editor. All right. So to actually configure it, you just open up regedit, navigate to HKey, local machine, software, Fslogix, and profiles, like you can see here. And then once you're here, what you would see is just kind of the basic configuration settings, right? So this is kind of the command center for Fslogix if it had one. And so by default, you're going to have those string value entries, which are indicated with the little red AB icon there. And those are doing things like defining the volume type and then specifying the VHD location, which in this case, as you can see, is FS01. And then these other entries are some stuff that we've added in, which are very helpful additions to improve the overall Fslogix experience. So this is things like disabling roam search and concurrent sessions to help with performance, along with a few to prevent what we call orphan profiles. But again, this is just the command console. So, this is where we're telling Fslogix how to interact with the user virtual hard drives, and we're doing this on each pool. But Fslogix from a software standpoint really doesn't get more complex than this. It's just software. You come here, you actually can put in these register keys to configure it if you need to, and the session host hosts the Fslogix software. The file server is actually what hosts the user piece when it comes to the virtual hard drives, and then the user folders and all that good stuff. So as you're seeing this now, you're probably saying, hey, that really is not too complicated. And the reality is, it really isn't that complicated. It's kind of a pretty straightforward software. So here on this slide, we are still on the session host. And what we're looking at is the user profiles on the session host themselves. So you can see in the screenshot to the left here, we are simply on the root of C and we've navigated to the users folder. So pretty straightforward. And what you should see in a good environment when it's clean are two different folders that I've highlighted there. We've got the standard users folder, and then we have the local _ users folder, which is for performance, and it's basically just a cache directory which gets mounted on the session host. And when users get a temporary profile, also known as an orphan profile, what you should see is these folders, but then also a bunch of duplicate folders for the individual user, right? And so, in this case, you'd either just sign out the user and delete all the duplicate folders, then have them sign back into the session host to bring things back to normal, or you could simply delete the host, reboot the file server, and kind of start over with a fresh, clean environment. And then the screenshot on the right there also was taken from the session host, and it's basically just a look at the mounted virtual hard drives from Device Manager as you'd see it on the session host. So now that we've kind of had the opportunity to see Fslogix and kind of the way that it is configured on the session host, and then also the user piece and how that is architected on the file server side, let's talk a bit about some of the benefits of Fslogix and kind of see, why Microsoft is pushing it as the future in multi-session environments. So first, out of the gate there, you can see at the top of the list, short login times. Now that the actual profile is not being downloaded, instead they're being mounted, the login time should be far shorter. And if there is a bottleneck, most likely it's going to actually be in the resource allocation on the virtual machine, in this case, either the file server or the session host, but not necessarily something with the Fslogix configuration. So you got shorter login times right on the top there. The next one, Fslogix makes it easy to switch resources. So what this means is, let's say you've got a user assigned to a WVD pool, right? And they're assigned to pool A, and they got a promotion, and we want to now move them to the WVD pool B. Actually making that change, all you're going to do is adjust where their user information that resides on FS01, where that actually points. So now instead of pointing at pool A, it'll point at pool B. And when the user signs in, their desktop background is going to be the same. All of their Windows customizations are going to remain. All of their documents, their desktop folders, their My Documents, their favorites folders, those will all get directed as well. But what they will notice is the additional resources or the additional software that is on this new WVD pool B, for instance. So makes it switching resources again very easy. The next one there, Fslogix application masking, and this is probably one of the most underutilized resources within Fslogix and something they provide, but it's tremendously beneficial. And the reason is because what Fslogix does is it allows you to have a group of users, let's say 50 users, and you can subdivide them and publish specific applications that are unique for each user group based on their workload. And you can do this all in a single WVD pool. So traditionally, where you'd need multiple pools to separate different departments, let's say a pool for marketing, a pool for the accounting department, a pool for general users. Now what you have is a situation where everyone's on the same pool, all the software and applications are installed on the same pool, but you've published the different applications that are unique to each user's requirements to that group of users. So just from kind of a cost perspective, you don't have to run multiple pools. You can now do everything on the same pool. So application masking with Fslogix provides you that ability. And then the last thing there is the virtual hard drives actually get mounted as native disks, and this makes it a much more fluent experience for the user, since the session host thinks that the virtual hard drive is actually a built-in drive and it treats it like it would any other disk. So with that, let's transition to our final slide here, which is dedicated to Fslogix troubleshooting. Now, I think it's important to note we actually have a lot of material on this topic. So if you want to learn more, I'd recommend navigating to our website at getnerdio.com and checking out our Nerdio Academy. Or you can look at our knowledge base, which is just help.nerdio.net, and then you'd search in Fslogix or Fslogix Troubleshooting. However, I do want to highlight two things here before I wrap up my section. The first is the most common error you'll get when leveraging Fslogix in the user profile, and that's the one on the left. And the vast majority of the time, this is triggered by a profile being currently mounted on a resource, and the user is attempting to log in with that same account somewhere else. So as an example, let's say the user is working on their WVD desktop. Maybe this is a more technical user in the environment, and they go on and log on to the pool template to make some changes, right? In this case, they'll receive the error since the profile is already mounted on the session host, and they're attempting to log into the pool template, so it recognizes that and throws the error and says, hey, sorry, couldn't mount your profile. Profile failed to attach. The second thing there is the one on the right, and this is probably your best bet when troubleshooting, and you are seeing this correctly. This is actually just Event Viewer. All right. So in this case, we've actually opened up Event Viewer on the session host. We've navigated to Applications and Service Logs, and then the Operational section. And as you can see, by checking here, you can just dig down to the exact session error and figure out why the user login attempt is failing. Now, I think these error descriptions were probably developed prior to Fslogix merger with Microsoft, and the reason is because they're actually incredibly helpful and usually explain the exact issue. And as we all know, Microsoft logs tend to be fairly cryptic and largely unhelpful. So awesome. Well, with that, that pretty much sums up my section. I appreciate everybody sticking with us all the way till the end here, and at this point, I will hand things back over to Kevin.